The first meeting that you'll have with the faculty you've chosen, it'll be an informal meeting, and I'm just going on the assumption that everybody starts in the fall, but obviously if you start in the spring, it'll be a different calendar. The first meeting would be at the end of the spring semester, and it will be a little bit alarming to you because it will be very generative. And people say, oh, I know, you should add this, you should add this. And, oh, have you thought of this? And since you're just starting the process and you are not yet the master of that literature, you will think, oh no, 500 books to read. That sounds like a lot. So just kind of hold on, and say, well, that sounds good, that sounds good. And eventually the faculty will catch themselves and say, that's really too much, that's too much, and then they'll back off. And then over the summer, it'll build back up again. And then in the fall, you'll meet again with your chair just to kind of rein it in, but you'll still bring something a little too big to the committee, and that gives the committee a chance to craft it and make it something that really everybody has been part of. Oh, just one other thing that I remember that I was going to say, in addition to what Harvey said. When you're asking people to be on the committee, just be specific. I'd like you to be chair. Will you be one of the members of my committee? Because otherwise people have to say to each other, do we know who's the chair? And then eventually you ask the student, they say, oh. So just make that decision.
I'll add one or two more things. When you approach the committee, have some idea what it is you want to read about. Don't go to them with no idea or an overly general idea. Have some idea what the topics are that you want to explore. And secondly, remember that the process of developing the reading list and the questions is really a negotiated process. It's not something where the committee is going to make the reading list for you. On the other hand, it's not something where they're going to simply accede to the reading list that you submit. It's something that you negotiate with the other committee members and that they negotiate amongst themselves and with you at the same time.
The question is for us to talk about how you actually develop the questions and know when you basically have a question that is appropriate for the prelims. That, like Harvey said, that is a gradual, emergent process. So this summer I've worked with Ricky and Trevor, for example, and we have looked at iterations of possible questions and then decided at various points that's way too big. Are you sure that's really where you want to go? Is that going to be something that is going to help you? Let me ask Trevor, since I just met with him, to hand me, do you have your questions handy? So he went through various iterations of that question, and the core question is, how do high school and undergraduate developmental math classes miseducate students about their own ability and the nature of mathematics? But he has to build around that material showing how his orientation to that question is different from somebody else's. So what we built in provisionally is in principle, high school and undergraduate developmental math classes address under preparation on the part of students, enabling them to move into regular math classes. Yet relatively few students do in fact move on to regular math classes. On the contrary, they seem to accept their categorization as remedial. And then the central question, how do high school and undergraduate developmental math classes miseducate students about their own ability and the nature of mathematics? And he's got pages and pages and pages and pages of possible readings, and he's broken them into categories regarding both math itself and differences between how studies of undergraduate remedial math have contrasted with high school remedial math, what the tracking literature says, and then some of the literature on what does it mean to be inclusive of new generations of undergraduate students. So that's just a general overview. Given the math isn't your area, does it make sense how that coalesces?
Let me add that I think might help. That question is not a question that's unique to mathematics, right? We talk about categorization and how the categories create the meanings that they attribute to the people. There's a large literature on that, right? That's not just associated with mathematics. If I were on that committee, I would say to Trevor, familiarize yourself with that literature, because that's the foundational literature for one question. And then for a second question, maybe to think about the things that are unique to mathematics when you think about that question, and then explore the literature directly on mathematics. Now, I don't know if that's what his committee had done, was recommending, but a lot of the times, I guess what I'm saying is, we have a specific question. Think about what's the foundational theory that's underlying your questions that you need to know more about. So in this case, it's about categorization and how do categories create the very categories and the meanings attached to them when we put people into them. Again, there's lots on that that's not just in math, right? And you want to know that, because that's really the foundation for what it is you're trying to explore. So you'd want to then build your question out of that. You won't know the actual question until you've read a little bit. You're going to start off with an area, and then after you've read some things, you'll be able to build a question. I think the way you do that is to think about yourself in conversation with the things that you read, but also think about these people in conversation with each other, and think about where do you want to intervene in the conversation they're having. What kinds of questions are emerging from the kinds of conversations they are having to each other, as well as with you, and which of those questions seem to you to be the most fruitful for you to write about. Because remember, they are not just writing in a context-free environment. They know what other people in those areas, in their area, are talking about and saying, and they are building their own thinking in relation to what they have said. And you want to see, what is your relationship to them, and where do I intervene and become part of that conversation?
It's in there, as well as grading. Like, how is this graded? I mean, it is obviously a subjective process, but at the same time, I do think that it'd be fair for many students who are entering into prelims to have at least an idea of what is expected, across the board for all students that are participating in it, beyond what your committee says to you.
So the question is, how are prelims graded, and what is the calendar of expectations? The calendar of expectations is actually, that all is laid out in the handout. So you will, you finalize your questions within the first 2 weeks, and then you have 12 weeks, and then your papers need to be in. That particular date will be decided by your committee, but it's 12 weeks from when you meet. And then they have 3 weeks to grade it, and they will provide you with a grade that is a committee grade. It is subjective in the same way that a class grade is subjective. It is graded like a paper that you would submit to these faculty. And you've already worked out with them what the expectations are, so it will be kind of distinctive to each group. But you do have the grade going into the oral discussion. You're not having to defend your written work, and not knowing, am I going to pass or not? You'll already have a grade.
Each question is graded separately, so you actually get 2 grades. If you need to rewrite, that's something that you negotiate with your faculty, the schedule for the rewriting and what it will be evaluated on. There is a rubric, I believe, that Audrey's made up about the kinds of things that people are looking for.
No, that's the comps.
Oh, I thought so let me say this about what I think most people are looking for. We're looking for you to be able to demonstrate your knowledge of the literature that you talk about, but not simply that. What you should be thinking about is, how do I take this literature to build an argument or a case for what it is you're trying to say? it is not intended to just be a summary. Most of us will have read that literature and have a fairly good idea of what the literature says. We want to know how you're putting it together in your head, how you see the relationship between the different things that you read, and how you use them to begin to scaffold, to move towards making a case for asking further questions that might require investigation in a dissertation or other form of research. So to summarize, what I'm saying is you want to be thinking about this as more than simply a summary of the literature. That probably is not going to get you the grade on the exam that you want. We want to know what you think about it and why you think what you do about it, and how you come to the conclusions about it that you do. And that means using the literature to make an argument, to think about how the different things relate to each other. Oftentimes they'll be in conflict with one another. They won't agree with each other. Sometimes parts of them will agree, parts of them won't. Sometimes they'll be asking different questions and thinking that different things are important. We need you to clarify that and bring those into conversation with one another through the lens that you bring to it. And that lens is your question. But the real key here, and I'm repeating myself, is this is not a summary. We want to know what you think. Now, hopefully, you will have models from your classes, because a lot of the assignments in the classes won't be just summarize what this article says or summarize what this book says. They will be asking you, what do you think about this argument and why? And how did you come to that conclusion? And this is a version of that, but drawing on lots of, not just one piece, but the variety of pieces that you've read. That burden of bringing them together is really yours. So we want to know, how are you bringing together? What kind of frameworks are you using to put them in conversation with one another? And where do you come out once you've done that?